With Horus Heresy finished in novel form, and I'm almost all the way through it myself, I wanted to take a moment to create a tier list of where I think the Primarchs stand. I'm currently in the middle of the End of the Death, and it's been really, really fascinating, and I've gotten to know all of the Primarchs pretty well in most cases. But today I want to take a moment and discuss the Primarchs themselves, what I like about them, what I don't, and where I'd rank them on a scale from F to S, with S being the god tiers, the Primarchs that are so well written and so powerful that they are the main characters. Now, as many of you know, that is not the case for all the Primarchs. There's several of them that are complete side characters, and we'll talk about them later on. Those will be our F tiers. As an author, I do base a lot of this on the characters themselves and how they're written and what they can do and how much I relate to them. So that does weigh heavily on me personally. I know every single one of you guys is going to have a different tier list based on these Primarchs. Before we do that, I want to thank today's sponsor, me. I decided it'd be a lot of fun to share my stories with you guys in a free form to start, and that all happens through Royal Road and through Patreon. There's a lot of really fun stuff I've got going on both. So the link will be in the description for both the Royal Road and Patreon sites. I've got a couple stories up on Royal Road and on Patreon, and if you want to read ahead of Royal Road, you can always do that on Patreon for free. We're also going to start doing some other fun stuff there as soon as we get enough people involved. So make sure you join it, and let's dive into the Primarch list.
For the Emperor!
So to make this simple, we're going to go in order of the legions, just to keep it nice and clean and make sure we don't miss anybody. So let's start with Lionel Johnson and the Dark Angels. In 30k, he is not one of my favorites. And this one's going to be hard because I have to not have 40k clouded. We'll talk about this later. I'm going to do a 40k list as well for the Return Primarchs later on, but my opinions on Lionel Johnson are drastically different in 30k versus 40k. In 30k, he's very unstable as a character. His motivations don't match his actions, and there's not a lot of really good definition to who he is. A lot of his Dark Angels around him are a lot better characters, and a lot of times he seems like the character whose job it is to move the plot forward and to press the issues. That's why he's there. He's the kind of MacGuffin character that just kind of shows up and does things in order to make things move forward. It's just that way with Imperium Sanguinius and the Night Lords and a lot of other things that way, which is unfortunate because I feel like the Dark Angels had a lot of potential to be very potent throughout the Horus Heresy and really make a difference. But because of the way he's written and the situations he's put in, he doesn't actually fall there. So for me, I'm going to have to put the Lion in... There he is. I'm going to put the Lion in E tier. So, not the world's best. Also, not the worst. No, actually, let's go... No, E tier. He's not non-existent in the story, but he's not really a deep character, unfortunately. He struggles a little bit with his brother's betrayal, but he gets over it way faster than he should. I know he has kind of trust issues and honestly feels a little bit unstable mentally. Almost like he's got to a level of cognitive dissonance that causes him to not really connect with his brothers, which is okay for the storyline, but it's also kind of frustrating. And we're really missing out on a lot of what he could be, which we do see in 40k. So I do have to give the 40k authors that. But he's missing out. So next, Fulgrim. Fulgrim, on the other hand, is a very structured character. He's got a lot of potential to him. He's got some depth to him as well. But unfortunately, the story picks up after he's already kind of started his descent into debauchery. And unless you include the actual Fulgrim novel, you don't really get to know him in his pure form, which is unfortunate, because I feel like if he'd been fleshed out more during the Horus Heresy, his fall would have been almost as heavy as Horus's was. And I wish he would have gotten that treatment. But unfortunately, he doesn't. He just kind of shows up, and you get just enough background to understand why he falls, but you never get to really embrace him pre-fall very well. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to put him at C tier just because he's not fleshed out well enough. I'm hoping in 40k we'll get to see a lot more of him fleshed out as a demon prince, but for now, that's where we're at. Next is the Iron Warriors and Perturabo. Perturabo I actually really enjoy. He's a really, really fascinating character, and he tends to be the shunned son of the Sons of the Emperor, and honestly, that's not my relationship with my dad. I don't feel that, but we've all been in that situation at work or at school where we're the odd man out, and it's really frustrating. So when he saw an off-ramp that he thought was stable, he took it. And then he realized what he'd gotten himself into and tries to extradite himself. So he's actually one of the people I relate with most out of the Primarchs, and I think he's written fairly well. I would love to see him fleshed out more. But tactically speaking and things like that, he's well balanced and relatable while still being a Primarch. He does have that quasi-godlike stance, but he also doesn't embrace chaos, so he kind of just ends up with the odd man out, where he tries to kind of act like he's part of the Imperium without being part of the Imperium and still being mad at his dad, but not wanting to embrace the Chaos Gods like a lot of his brothers do. And it's really, really fascinating. And the only thing that really kind of detracts a little bit is his level of hatred for Dorne. I don't really feel like it's justified. It could have been. There's some stuff that could have been added pretty easily that would have really expanded his hatred for Dorne, and giving him real justification would have been fascinating. So I'm going to put him at B tier. I think he's a solid B. He's got some depth, he's got some believability, but he's just not quite there yet. Next is my personal legion. It is the White Scars. It's what I opened up playing on the tabletop a long time ago, and it's the legion I embraced the most, especially throughout the Horus Heresy. They only have a couple books where they're involved, but the amount of character depth the Khan gets throughout that, along with his legion, is insane. He's not one of the main characters of the story, but he's one of the characters I wish there was more of. There's a couple of the Primarchs that are that way that just don't get as much love as they should have, because the roles they play, especially in the End of the Death, are so big that you just wish they were a little fleshed out more. And I kind of wish there was some little bit less time spent in other places. So I'm going to put him as an A tier. I'm going to put the Khan as an A tier. I think he's a solid character, and he was super close to getting there. And it kind of hurts me not to put him at S tier, but I do think he's definitely up there for sure. So the next one's going to be Leman Russ. Leman Russ is another one of these characters that I wish was more fleshed out. He's kind of superficial through a lot of the Horus Heresy and is very much the executioner. He gets a couple solid moments, especially in the book Corax, where he becomes a real Primarch with real depth and starts to question some of his realities and what he's going through. And I wish he was given more of that opportunity. I think he kind of falls in that same category as Fulgrim, where he's cool. There's a lot going on, but he just doesn't get the depth he needs. I think he kind of falls in the same category as the Lion, where he's just not fleshed out. He's very one note. He's very stereotypical. It's easy to predict what he's going to do and how he's going to react. And that's literally all he does. The only quasi depth he gets is during the Siege of Prospero. But even then, it's hard to understand why he hates Psyker so much. It's not really justified until you get to the Russ books themselves, the Primarch books, and it's hard to really grasp his hatred, which I know is kind of the point. A lot of the Horus Heresy is clearly based around the narrator, the perspective of the narrator, but you miss out on why he's doing a lot of the stuff he does. He's there. He's kind of the boogeyman of the Emperor who's always there looming over the other Primarch's shoulders, but he never really gets his own depth as a character, which I hope they eventually correct in 40k. So I'm actually going to put him at D tier because he gets a little bit more depth than Lionel Johnson, but he doesn't really get anywhere near the depth I would want him to, especially since he could be very, very cool as a Primarch. The next one up is going to be Dorn with the Imperial Fists. Dorn is a really fun character as well. You get to see a lot of him because he's on Terra, and he's often brought in as a tangential character to move the plot forward and give a little bit of depth. You do get to see some of his personality. I wish there was more of it, though. And most of Dorn's storyline is running from one problem to another, trying to put out fires and trying to be a little bit less predictable than his brothers expect him to be. And it's pretty good. I enjoy it. There's less of an emotional struggle that I would have wanted from Dorn, but I do think he's fleshed out kind of to the same level as Fulgrim for me. So I'm going to put him at C tier as well. Now, these do not directly reflect my opinions of them as actual legions or characters as a whole, because there's a lot of these that I'm ranking low that I see a lot of potential in, or for example with the Lion, who's actually the lowest one on the tier list right now, that I know gets better, but because we're doing the Horus Heresy right now, I have to judge him on the Horus Heresy. So next is Conrad Kurz. Conrad Kurz is actually one of the most fascinating characters that is in the Horus Heresy. You get to see a lot of his depth of insanity, I guess is the best way to put it, throughout the Horus Heresy. A lot of flashbacks and a lot of build up for him. The point where I actually really like him as a character. He's got a lot of depth, which makes him very good to love to hate. And that is his job in the story, and I'm okay with that. But getting that visibility and that depth is what I wish a lot of these other Primarchs would have had. His choices are somewhat understandable. There's a lot of times where you start to see his descent into madness, whether it be in flashbacks or in conversations with his brothers. And you can understand how he got to where he is thought-wise. It's a little off-kilter and a little bit unstable, but you can understand it. And for that, it makes him one of my favorite characters. And honestly, I'm going to put him up at probably an A tier as well. I think he kind of falls in the same category as the Khan, where he's got a lot of depth, he's got a lot of believability, he's easy to understand how he got where he is. His logic may be a little bit flawed and unstable, but he's a solid character. And frankly, I wish he was more involved in the Horus Heresy compared to some of these other ones. But you only get to see him pitted against a few of his brothers here and there, and I think it was kind of a missed opportunity, kind of like with the Khan. Next is the Blood Angels. Of all the Horus Heresy, Sanguinius is one of the best understood and best represented of the Primarchs. You really get to love Sanguinius, and I know that's basically the entire point of the Horus Heresy, is to put you in a position where you get to know and love several of these characters. And for me, Sanguinius definitely is one of them. He's one of the few Primarchs that I would actually like to serve under if I were a Space Marine. Him and the Khan are definitely two of my tops. I would definitely serve under them. Especially in the Horus Heresy era. It's easy to understand why his sons love him and why his brothers love him. His influence is insane, and his death is the same way. It's completely jarring, even though you know it's coming, and it really hits hard because they took the time to grow him as a character. So Sanguinius is going to be my first S tier. It's a pretty obvious one. There's going to be a few of those S tiers that everyone sees coming, not super shocking, but I think it's an easy choice to put him there, especially if we're talking about character development and depth. Sanguinius is definitely one of the main characters of Horus Heresy. The next one is the complete opposite, and that is Ferrus Manus. Ferrus Manus is anything but the main character. You get almost no depth besides an anecdotal story about him and Fulgrim, and the few times he haunts Fulgrim in his memories while he's fighting the demon infestation in his body and in his mind before he turns Demon Prince. So there's not much to say about Ferrus Manus. I actually wish there was more to him. He actually seems like he has a lot of potential and could have been a really, really cool Primarch. So I do hope someday they go back to the Great Crusades and write some of the stories to fill in the gaps so that we can get to know Ferrus Manus better. Because honestly, when he died, it was kind of a meh, which is sad to say, but I didn't have time to really care about Ferrus Manus before he died. So there's not much to miss there. So he unfortunately is going to be an F tier. So we're about halfway done with the list. If you guys disagree with anything I said or have different orders or places you'd like to put them, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you guys and see what you guys think. But next, we're going to talk about the World Eaters. Angeron is one of the saddest stories of all of the Primarchs. Unfortunately, because this is Horus Heresy, we are missing out on his novel as well. But I do think he still has some decent depth to him. You get to see a lot of his fall to despair and his depth of pain and mistrust of everything when he returns to his homeworld. And honestly, it really hit me hard. I hadn't been a big fan of Angeron through about the first third of the heresy, maybe a little bit more. But then as soon as you start to learn about him, you start to really understand who he is and why he's as mad as he is, especially at the Emperor. I would be pissed too, especially when all of your brothers got treated very well. A lot of their friends and colleagues and their fighters are standing beside them in the fights of the Great Crusade, and you got abandoned, and your friends and your brothers died meaninglessly when the Emperor could have stepped in. It's one of the saddest fall from grace tales that exists in 40k or in 30k, and because of that, I'm actually going to put Angeron at a B tier as well. I wish there was a little bit more to him, and I wish he would have the ability to confront a little bit more of it, especially with getting answers to why he was left behind from his father. But maybe we'll get that someday in 40k. I don't know. That does give him some pretty good depth. Next is Rabute Gilliman. Gilliman is an interesting case here as well. He's kind of unnecessary to a large part of the story. A lot of Imperium Secundus is just kind of filler to explain what some of the Primarchs are doing so they can't be at Terra for the final battle, which is unfortunate. I do think Gilliman has a lot of potential as a character, but we really do miss a lot of his strength and understanding why he does what he does. You get a little bit of a feel for him throughout the Imperium Secundus stories, but he's very one note, which is kind of sad. You do get to see little glimpses of humanity for him, but otherwise he's a very direct and semi-cold ruler and diplomat and strategist, and that's what he does. Which I get. I understand that that is a lot of his character, but I wish we'd been given more depth to him. I'd love to see more of his struggle with his own confidence issues that we see with the Lion. It's unfortunate that we don't get to see that up front, especially when there's an opportunity to see him reacting to the Lion's fall from grace and see his hero kind of lost. And I miss that opportunity. I wanted that, and you never really given it. So for me, I'm going to put him at C tier too. He's got a lot of potential, and I think in 40k we're addressing a lot of that, but he's just not there in 30k yet. He's a decent character that kind of holds his own, but he's kind of a one-note character just like Dorn and just like Fulgrim. Okay, now we're on to Mortarion in the 14th Legion. Mortarion's an interesting character as well. There's a lot of depth to him. At the same time, he's also very one note. It's interesting to see how a character can be deep and not deep at the same time, but somehow they managed to pull it off with Mortarion. There's a lot of relatability with him, but there's also a lot of what he's going to do. His caring for his sons and watching their choices to embrace chaos and the struggle there is interesting, but it's also frustrating that you don't get to see more of him and more of his actual struggle. And I do wish there was more of that. So I think he's going to fall in this D tier with Russ. Once again, nothing personal to Death Guard or to Mortarion. I just don't think he's given the depth that he really should have. Next, we're going to talk about Magnus. Magnus is one of the top characters for story arcs and understanding why they do what they do. Unfortunately, he also kind of fades out of existence for a large part of the Heresy. That being said, he is still pivotal to the Siege of Terra and everything that happens there. So I do wish there was a little bit more story filled in between where he makes his final choices. I may have missed it or forgotten some of it. I do remember his conversations with Lorgar in a few of those books, but I would have loved to see him struggle a little bit more with his decision to fully embrace chaos. That being said, I think he's an S tier. He's one of the key main characters of the story, and without him, the heresy falls apart. It loses a lot of its strength and its power. So I think Magnus is going to go with Sanguinius in the S tier. He's one of Sons of the Emperor that we really get to know well. Next is the wolf himself, Horus Lupercal. It's a pretty obvious one here as well. He's one of the main characters, obviously, and I feel like he is one of the most well-defined Primarchs of all of them, especially because of the first three books. And later on, you get to see his descent to madness. You get to see his choices and see how far he goes in his pursuit of chaos, and his power level and his characterization is insane. So honestly, I think he is the top S tier in the Horus Heresy. I don't really see any other way you can put him on this list and not have him there. He is the Emperor's favorite and the fallen of the Emperor all in one, and it's really, really good to see. It is well done in all means. I really enjoyed that part. Next is probably my least favorite Primarch. That is Lorgar. Lorgar is interesting because there's parts of him as a deeply religious person myself I do understand. But he also makes a bunch of leaps and jumps that I can't follow, and in some cases I struggle to really grasp. Things like the fall of Monarchia are very relatable. I understand his hatred of the Emperor after that, and I understand a lot of what's driving him to rebel. But there's also several steps he takes that I don't know if I can understand, like his choice to directly manipulate his brothers and to abandon a lot of his relationships are interesting, and I don't know if I can grasp them too well. So I feel like he's going to kind of fall in that C tier as well, in the he kind of almost becomes one note, but he does have enough characterization that I can at least grasp him as a character. So we're going to go and put him in C tier as well. Next is Vulcan. Vulcan is a very fun character. I do like him a lot. He does have a lot of really cool growth and instability and change throughout the Horus Heresy. And he's a very fun character to get to know, especially through his sons. He does have one unfortunate book that I think builds him as a character very well, but was poorly written. So I'm not going to knock that on him as well. Vulcan Lives is probably one of my most controversial stories. I do have an entire video on it, so go check that out. But I think he's definitely one of the better characters in the entire story. And I don't think he rates S tier because he could you pulled from the story, and you won't lose a lot. You'll lose, I should say, you'll lose a lot of the story. You won't lose a lot of the plot movement. He's not key to the actual arc of the story, so he's not one of the main characters. He's just a high secondary character, kind of like the common curse. So he is going A tier. And like we discussed, the two Primarchs I play on the tabletop, one is in E tier and the other one is an A tier. So this does not reflect how I feel about the Primarchs just in cool factor or in potential. Maybe we'll do one of those later. This just represents where I feel like they sit in the Horus Heresy on the character scale. Next, after the Salamanders, is another one of my favorite Primarchs, Corvus Corax. He doesn't get as much love as I think he should because of his involvement in the Horus Heresy and his involvement in 40k. I'm going to link another video right up here to the Primarch theory where I discuss what I think Corax's role is in 40k. So make sure you go check that out. But I do think he's pivotal to the story. There's a lot that he goes through emotionally that keeps a lot of his brothers alive and helps a lot of the story move forward. He's one of the first Primarchs to really directly address the Horus Heresy with his father and with Dorn and force people to start reacting to the heresy the way people should be reacting to a civil war. And I think even in the end, even though he doesn't go to Terra to fight on the walls, he does have a large effect on the actual siege by harassing and cutting off supply lines and opening up channels to allow reinforcements to come that forces Horus's hand. So I think Corax, surprisingly, is an S tier. It's going to be probably the most controversial statement of this entire video, but I think if you take Corax out of the heresy goes a very different direction, which is kind of weird to say, but I really do think that. I think there's a lot of things that happen throughout the heresy that would have been lost or would have been changed had Corax fallen at his fen. And finally is Alpharius, one of my two least favorite Primarchs, period. I despise the Alpha Legion for a lot of reasons, but for me, he's also fairly well fleshed out as a character. There's a lot that Alpharius does that throws things into chaos. It's hard to understand his motivations, and I get that that's kind of his entire point, but he does have some depth to him. You get to see some of his motivations, some of his instabilities with his brother, and trying to figure out where they stand and why they're doing what they're doing is really, really cool. So I think as potential, he's going to go in the B tier as well. Or I should say they're going to go in the B tier as well. Alpharius and Omegon are good Primarchs for the story. They do a lot of stuff. They do have some depth, but they're not crucial to the entirety of the story as a whole, kind of. They do have some effect on the story, especially when it comes to the White Scars and the Space Wolves, getting them into motion, but not really knowing where they stand and their choices and the instability of will they, won't they is honestly kind of annoying, and I think it detracts from their depth as Primarchs. So let me know in the comments below if you disagree with anything I've said, or if you agree with it, or think that a Primarch should be in a different place, or feel like I missed something. Please let me know. This was a pretty quick video that I think you guys will enjoy. And as a reminder, today was sponsored by Tartary Press, my press that publishes my books. We have a bunch of fun stuff going on Royal Road where you get to see some of my upcoming works for free. You can also get access to Patreon for a bunch of cool stuff there, along with free access to stories that I'm involved in, as well as special updates. If you'd like to see some of my Warhammer content on there as well, let me know. I will happily start breaking out some tiers for the Readers of the War Game side of Patreon as well. I hope you guys like and subscribe. We've got a lot of really fun videos coming out, and I will see you guys next time.